Well, looking at the topics I had in front of me, we've just finished up the discussion of truth, and I was looking at kind of where we wanted to go. We've jumped into kind of the idea of emotional health, some of the consequences, and there's not really a natural order that all of these go in, at least that I could find. So we're just going to kind of jump in the circle and kind of work it around until we're done with this series of topics as they come to me. My name is Andrew Green. I am the host here in the Idea Collision, and I'm glad to have you along. If this is your first time, then I guess you'll kind of figure out how I set up topics and then discuss them. If you've been around, I thank you for kind of continuing, and hope you to share this with people who I think really need it. This is a podcast, as I say. It's not just light listening. I mean, I do hope it's light in that sense, but it is there for a reason. It's not just not just stories or what have you. I do try to give a different perspective. I try to contrast some ideas, events, history, whatever things that I think are appropriate to identify concepts that we have as a people and how it affects us individually and how it affects us as a society. And then, of course, to offer the idea that these do dovetail with religion and specifically Christianity, that they're a part of what makes us healthy spiritual people. So where we left off last week, and by the way, again, if this is your first one, you don't have to go back and look at previous ones to get where we're at. These are all kind of individual applications of things, and if there is something that I feel is necessary to jump off from, then I'll kind of mention it. So with that, where we were last week was talking about emotional, spiritual, mental health. Some of the things that people struggle with, and some of the values that people have, that certain generations have, and how we address each of those very individual topics. Now, they are primarily consequences of actions, is what we said, that there's not really a biological, that I shouldn't say that there isn't, but that a biological answer to things is actually the minority. Most of the things that we have as mental health, or is called mental health, is really emotional health, or spiritual health, things that are either consequences of other people's actions or things that are consequences of our own actions. And when we get into these are obviously unpleasant. And so we are conditioned as humans with a good characteristic is that we try not to repeat those. We even have sayings devoted to this. We say things like, those who, fail to learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. Or we will we'll say, insanity. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. These sayings are a part of us because they're true. They're cliches, but they're true. We do try to learn from the past. We want to prevent things that we perceive as negative. Well, these are all negative, especially when we're talking about mental and emotional, various things like that. So what you typically, when we combine this with the idea of a generational look, again, not that everybody in a generation is the same, but that there are trends. And so if there's a generational trend that had something negative happen to it, you're going to find that there's a generational trend to try to avoid that in the next generation of their children. And so if you have, so for example, like a lot of people will, we experience something negative, and we're going to set up our families to not have that condition. I'll give you some examples here in just a second. So, baby boomers. Let's take baby boomers. They were not just education wasn't available to them. A lot of them grew up fairly poverty, conditions because of their parents coming from a Great Depression era. So they might not have had a lot of ability to go to college. So that became their thing. My kid's going to go to college, and so we see that their children were the ones. Gen Xers and millennials were really, really, really big. Education was a big high priority because it was their parents' high priority, and so and one of the things that we do, however, when we make these rules, they do become rules in and of themselves. They become a thing that they are absolutes. So if I say absolutely, like you're letting me down because you're not going to college, or what have you, because it's so valuable to me. We a lot of times make rigid rules, and we don't. Maybe here's a kid that doesn't need college, or maybe here's a kid that knows what he wants to do and it doesn't entail college. So, something like that. But we have these values that are so rigid, and we're going to look at kind of how this works through a generation of people, not just on an individual thing. So I'll give you a personal example of how rigid works. Because at some point in time, these become counterproductive to me. Before we get to let me give you my personal illustration. We moved to Ukraine. I have a personal value, I guess, that I value good customer service, sometimes over the product itself. I want someone to work with me to have a good product. I want to come in your store and you be polite. You're not polite to me, I'm probably not coming back in your store. So we moved to Ukraine, and we were there for like a year. And listen, I'm not going back to that store. Well, I soon found out that I was not going to eat or be clothed because this policy was counterproductive to me, because I didn't go into a lot of places where I felt that I had good customer service, where they were very polite or what have you. Well, two things were at work. First of all, they don't get paid enough to care. That's the first thing. That, they just don't get paid well to be concerned with their tone of voice. The second thing is, part of that was, because I don't want to badmouth Ukrainian people, part of it was my misinterpretation. They have an accent. They have a language. The language would be similar in a way to German, where just the language structure itself makes it sound rude. It's an accent thing. So I thought everybody was angry with me, actually, even people that I knew were my friends. I just thought, man, did I do something wrong today? So a lot of this, I'm walking out of stores saying I'm never going to come back, and it's really because I don't even understand the language that well. So there was these funny things, but I had this rigid rule, and I was like, well, I won't go there. Well, I won't go there. I won't get that thing, and that in that society makes it very difficult to get a lot of things because they don't have nearly the selections and options that we do. So, this is how rigid becomes counterproductive. And like you see, we've talked about a lot of things that happen. If you have a situation where there's trauma, or if you have a situation where someone grew up with some sort of unsupervised dangerous situation, then they're likely to become helicopter parents, what we call helicopter parents. Well, they're just sensitive to things. It's not that they're bad. They're just sensitive to things that I'm not, because I didn't grow up in a situation where I would be overly concerned about that. So I realized in Ukraine that my principles, as rigid principles, were going to inconvenience me. So I was going to have to moderate it, and that's what I want us to be able to do. It's okay to have tendencies. It's okay to have principles. And I want to look at this sentence that people say, my children are never going to. And this isn't a child raising video, and I'll make some applications outside of that here as we travel through this. But children and families make a really good illustration of it, and that's why I'm using it. If it does help you in raising your kids, then that's great. I've had 4 kids, so and they're all in different stages, so I have a lot of experience. This is kind of where I draw some of my illustrations from. And so one of the things we see is take physical harm. All right. Now, because of my way I was raised, I was injured frequently because of my own stupidity and daredevilness. So it would be easy for me to have this value that my kid's never going to get hurt. Because a lot of people do. A lot of people avoid that. I've tried to moderate that, and for the reasons that we're going to talk about. So like, for example, if you're going to ride bikes, well, what is the safety precautions? Okay, helmets. We should have helmets. I don't really make my kids wear helmets, but I've had boys who weren't going to wear helmets. And, okay, then what? How far is too far to make sure my children are never going to get hurt in this case? Knee pads? Okay, we've got to have the knee pads. Elbow pads? Okay, got to have the elbow shin pads. Okay. Now, soon enjoyment becomes a chore because it takes you like 45 minutes to put on all the protective gear. And the kids are like, I don't even want to go. I don't even want to go ride my bike. I'm just going to stay inside and, play video games or something because it's such a chore to enjoy myself. And so I'm not going to, I might even go a step further. I'm not even going to let them engage in anything that I perceive dangerous. And again, there's rational and there's irrational. So bungee jumping, skydiving, I'm not really personally interested in that. When you're 18, you can do stupid things. In the meantime, I'm going to show you videos of people, hurting themselves. You probably don't want to do that. I'm not really into motorcycles. So I've had one, so I can speak from experience. Where is reasonable? And so we can have that discussion, but we recognize at some point things become unreasonable. And, I have an oldest son. He actually did fire breathing. He's in high school, and he's he'd get like the torch oil, and I'm like, what are you doing? We don't have tiki torches, and then he's sitting out there like with a lighter, putting like fluid in his mouth, which can kill him if he swallows it, and he's breathing fire. I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. I'm going to be honest with you. There's some of my kids, not going to let them do that. It was like, hey, you'll be drinking it. We'll be going to poison control and wondering why I'm a bad dad. So that's cool. But there's experience he has because I moderated. In other words, there's cool things he has and has the photos to prove them. So that's maybe some parents would draw the line there. That would be on their side. Then there's the idea of, okay, we came in, my wife actually found this. He left it out and didn't cover his tracks. Same son had a recipe he had looked up on the internet, and it was how to make rocket fuel. I think I have a photo here. So as I'm editing this, I just realized my wife did have a photo, now that I think of it. So anyway, here's a recipe for rocket fuel. We're probably not going to make rocket fuel. And I want him to be exposed to things in life, but I don't want him to, unnecessarily put himself in harm's way. We try to find the line, because if I have the rigid principle, it's going to become unproductive for him if I limit everything. So if I limit all danger, then I have to have absolute implementation because I have this rule. And so if that's the case, then I'm going to limit his life. That limits his joy. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. He lives in a bubble because I want to make sure my ultimate goal, my ultimate value in life is his safety. Well, he's wonderful. He's safe, but he's not enjoying life at all. The second point is that limiting risk will mean limiting his reward. He's going to get less out of not just enjoyment, but if I limit the amount of risk he has, then he's not going to get the reward for accomplishing or achieving things because it's too risky physically. So So he ended up getting a concussion in football and then ended up deciding, I don't want to football the next year. Okay, I could have limited and said, listen, football players get concussions. I could have limited that. Um, and then again, limiting his achievements and limit his ability to determine what he likes and doesn't like to do. That was a part of his own process. Third, limiting experiences means limiting experience. So the fewer experiences that he has, the less experience as a human being he has. In other words, his ability to, like I said, learn and what he wants to do and get good at something, because I've limited those. Well, those I view as dangerous. And in the end, I'm a guide for his life for 18 years, or her. I have one daughter, but his life is not mine. I have to let him live. I have to let her live and try to guide them to adulthood safely. That's with proper principles. That's my goal. So that's how people do this with material things. It also works the same, physical harm. The same works with material things. Some people grow up, and we talk about people who grew up poor. Well, so then they say, my kid is never going to be poor. Okay? Financial goals are good to set, just like safety. But the bottom line for their life becomes one of the stupidest things we ever say is self-worth. What is a person worth? Right? We say that when we talk about how much money they have in the bank, and that becomes their identifier. I am worth $1 million. Well, that's only if you're identifying it based on money. And so then there's a subtle transition. This often happens, is that my child should never go without. I should never my child should always have. If they need something, they want something, whatever, they should have it. Because I didn't, and I missed that, and I thought I missed out in life because of that. And so then they're given everything. It's my value. I didn't have this, and so, well, if I'm the parent, it's my duty to guide them through these things with my values. Then I'm the one that's going to have to enforce it. I have to enforce the safety. I also have to enforce them having stuff. And so the kids in this scenario, the kids will be given everything. They won't have to work for it. They won't have to do anything. They're just typically given it. And so we run through kind of the same thing. They don't appreciate possession. So when my son went down, he paid for his car, and it's a beater. It is awful. So we took him to college. Now, I remember college a long time ago, and, everybody had a beater. One guy had a nice car. It's not that way now. Holy cow. Everybody's got these, like, super nice cars, and you just know that they're not paying for their own education. Okay? And I was like, you know what? A good chunk of them are going to flunk out. Why? Because they're not invested in their own education. They're not invested in everything they want. Daddy's going to catch them. If they fail, like the same dad that bought them like a F-350 2022, and it's like there's is going to be the dad that's going to catch them and do whatever, going to get them a job somewhere with a buddy, and they're just going to be coddled and pushed along through life, not allowed to fail. And so he's not, they're not going to learn to invest in themselves. And I'm not saying every person like this that goes to college with a nice car has that. But a good amount of them have this inability to fail because of the parents protecting them, and that is going to be dangerous later on down the road. So they don't learn to. I want my son and my daughter to learn to invest in themselves. I think that is a valuable tool to have, and because if they're not, the next result is that they are conditioned. They're programmed to expect rescue. And that's wonderful, except I'm not going to always be there to rescue. I'm 50 years old, and that's not necessarily old anymore, but at some point, I'm not going to be able to be a safety net. They're going to be an adult, They're going to have families. I'm not going to be able to rescue. So there's a statement made, and there's so many applications we could run through, not just physical harm or material, but you see how these work. And we're going to come back. There's a topic I would love to throw under here, but I don't have time for it. But there's a statement in the Bible, and Peter writes this. He says, act as free men. Just don't use your freedom as a cover to do evil things. In other words, God communicates to us the ability to make our own personal choices, and yet to do so with the wisdom that comes with freedom. And so it's important to teach both things, not just liberty, but smarts as well. And I need to be able to be free to experience life, but with reasonable limits, and to be learned, to have learned as kids growing up, to be taught why I should do this or when I should do this. So it works for us personally, right? If it works for me personally, then it's going to be a part of my expectations. So it's what I promote. For my kids, it'll be what I promote for people I meet, for people I influence in the church, whatever. For me personally, that one of the places I influence people is in the church. But it could be in your workplace, it could be wherever. Rigid protection will promote irresponsibility. That's just, we've kind of gone through that, but I want to emphasize that as one of the principles that we take away from this. If I don't pay for college, whatever those situations are, we explain how those work and how those manifest themselves. So, like, I don't want him to throw his grades away because he didn't invest in it and it's not really meaningful. There's no repercussions for him. And so I don't want to create a superficial safety net for my daughter, for example, who's going to go run off and spend money on stuff and then go, well, Dad will buy the groceries, because I probably would. I'm not going to let her starve. And so I don't want her, there ends up, the next thing is that they're not really prepared for real world. And again, I'm going to make other applications other than children. I don't want people without kids or who aren't ever planning on having kids, or your kids are raised to go, oh, this means nothing to me. This is a waste here. Really, reality is going to present a different set of obstacles for people. So they're going to find that life is not exactly fair to them. If I've created a universal safety net, then they have expectations that aren't real. My oldest son, we used to play a game that all parents play, at least all fathers play, and that's, jump off of some high place and I'll catch you. And kids, for the most part, like this game. So we were at a church. We were in the dining hall, and I had, for some reason, he was on the top of the counter. We'd probably played this one or twice, and I turn around and I'm talking to somebody there, and he's like, 1.5 years old, 2 years old, and he runs and just threw himself into the air off of the thing. And I fortunately have good peripheral vision. Otherwise, he would have been, we would have been making a trip to the hospital, because he just launched himself into the air. And because, fortunately, he launched himself my direction. Right? He had a artificial safety net that he thought Dad, that I had created, is always there for the catching of shooting star children, and so parents do this in practically, and not just parents, but people who are teachers can do this. And uh, in what we promote. We have these rigid rules. We have this protection, and that affects the things that we do and set up for for whatever people that we come in contact. We're not going to let them fail. We're not going to let them whatever. And ask any parent, or excuse me, ask any educator how many times they get parents come into their school with parents who are upset with the grade that their kid got. Right? It's evidence of this. They have to control the situation. And there are kids that are the benefit of teachers with the same policies. They're not going to I can't let them fail and get held behind. Or we see this in a criminal justice system where, we can't let this ruin their life. So we're going to give them a very short sentence to get them out on the street again. And you see how that works. These kids think that they can get away with anything. Why? Because they can get away with anything, and they're programmed to do this right up until they do something where society says, okay, we have to put you away now. And they're like, why? I've gotten off with things in the same neighborhood bad 30 other times. I've got a rap sheet, and I have this. All of a sudden, no, now you're going away for 40 years. What? Yeah. Because why? Because they had unrealistic expectations set by parts of society. So it's counterproductive. And there have been, if you want to look at the unproductivity of this, you just have to go back to 5 years. It's interesting that the things that parents have set up to try to accomplish things in their children have actually come back to achieve the exact opposite. Right? Parents have set these up to try to help their kids and to try to be nice and be friends with, that's another topic for another day. But and then we see that it's in the last 5 to 10 years, you can see the negativity, the impact on an entire generation of this, where you see, with all this niceness directed at kids, why do we see a generation that probably hates their parents more than any other generation? I mean, every generation rebels, but it's such a pronounced thing that even Arizona State University has devoted a study to it. This is a thing where kids are visibly not just at things that the generation did, we're the anti-war generation, you guys were at war, and but visibly hateful at their own parents' generation. So, and at their parents. I saw a video of a girl just horrible, trashing her deceased father at the funeral. It was. I'm like, what has happened to a generation where they do this? And there's probably a lot of answers to that. So generations that aspired to be perfect parents are scorned by their kids. And it was like, wait, how did that happen? Well, they meet adversity. These kids meet adversity, and then they realize that they don't have any tools. They were never given any tools. So now they're more vulnerable. And this is where the counterproductivity comes in. They're more vulnerable to disappointment, to failure, because everybody fails, but they don't have opinions that differ from whatever the thing is, that they're just not prepared for it because that was a part of the protection. So even getting stuff ends up not being a treat. Why? Because they expect it. It just happens. I want it, so therefore I get it. So when they can't get it, then life is being unfair to them. These are values that we instill as a. He's like, now, hey, education has to be free. Why? Because I've been given everything else. You see, again, so it's not just parents; it's now society. And so again, this is not a child raising video. It is much broader than that. As you can see, we are involved in other people's lives, whether it be kids or as we shape the expectations that people will have in their families. So it is not just the principle itself, but that can be wrong. The idea of wanting to protect or wanting to guide, and all those are wonderful, but the rigidity sometimes, that inability to moderate and say, okay, I have this general principle that I want to get through, but my kid needs to experience some things. They need to have something under their belt, because they are going to soon not be under my protection. I can't control other, people in every situation. If I'm an educator, if I'm whatever I am, if I'm personally, I guess a type of an educator. I'm in a church. I'm a preacher. I can't control everybody sitting there listening to me. So I have to give them principles that guide them, and it is up to them. I have to give them tools to live by. So I encourage you to look at the source of the core values, not just your values themselves, but the source of them, and see, are they reactions to things? And am I projecting what are my histories? Am I using those to project a value on somebody else that's not maybe 100% healthy? And worse yet, am I living somebody else's values? Maybe I have accepted a core value for my life that was based on an experience that somebody else had, and I need to say, you know what, that's not really a good value for me. I'm not in that situation. That doesn't really apply. And what is the source of this value that is making me do this particular thing, or feeling compelled to do this thing and uphold this value? There's probably a lot we could go off on, and maybe some point we will, and talk about core values. But as you see, this is a broad topic, and I'm going to kind of draw it up here, and we're going to come back to one specific one here, probably either next week or the week after, as we cycle through here. But I hope that this gives you kind of a perspective on maybe the way that you process your own decisions, the way you do things, and also the way you impact other people through the experiences that you've had, and I hope you have a more enlightened week, and in all things, as we kind of let these ideas collide and come out with something that is valuable. All right, we'll see you next week.